Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, where I work, which is located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Now, this series is designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts. All of our speakers are some part of NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now today, we'll be introducing you to Kelly Drinnen with NOAA's Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary in Galveston, Texas. Now, while we'll be talking about coral reefs in Texas, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. Now, I just want to say when I introduce you to these groups, I am trying my best to pronounce them correctly, so please bear with me. We acknowledge that Kelly is coming to us from the land of the Kowawiltikan and the Atacapa Ishak and the Karankawa. We are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhedaquina. I want to extend special thanks to our American Sign Language interpreters, Crystal Butler and Jillian Traumer. A few guidelines before I hand you over to Kelly. You are all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure that everyone can hear. However, that box where you're writing where you're from is a great place to write questions. Please let us know if you're a class tuning in and if there are multiple people watching who's specifically asking the question. We encourage you to write those questions throughout. I'll keep track of them for Kelly. She'll stop every now and then to answer a few. We might not get to all of your questions, but we'll answer as many as we can. So enough of me talking. I know you really want to hear from Kelly, so I am going to turn it over to her and we're going to learn all about Texas corals today. So Kelly, over to you.
All righty. Hello, everybody. It's so good to be here today. So before I get started into the topic of Texas coral reefs, I thought I'd share a little bit about myself. Who am I? Well, I am a nature lover. I am a beachcomber, a fish geek, self-proclaimed. That just means I like fish a lot. And when I was growing up, I loved going to aquariums, visiting the beach, and learning about fish. I just didn't know I could turn it into a career. So when I went off to college, I studied Spanish and math, my favorite subjects, but eventually found my way back to the ocean and realized I could turn my passion into a job. And so now my job is as an education and outreach specialist with Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary, where I get to help others discover what a wonderful place this is out in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's start with where Flower Garden Banks is located. The coral reefs of Texas are in Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. This is part of the National Marine Sanctuary System. And if you've been following along with NOAA Live, you've heard about the National Marine Sanctuary System a little bit already. You'll see where all of our locations are around the continental United States, out near Hawaii, and down in the very South Pacific near American Samoa. But what I want to know is which sanctuary is closest to you. So go ahead and write that in the chat box right now.
All right, so this is Grace from the chat box. So go ahead and write in there which National Marine Sanctuary is closest to you. And I know that some of you have done this, so you should already be familiar with your sanctuary. So let's see, we have quite a few who say that Flower Garden Banks is the closest. Jolene and Alice and Paul. And let's see, Kurt says Gray's Reef. Laura says Flower Garden Banks. And Brenda says Thunder Bay. Let's see, we have some folks from Hawaii that are saying they're close to the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale. So Michelle and Joseph says Mallows Bay. So we've got, let's see, I'm gonna see, oh, we have a bunch of people say the Olympic Coast. Katya and Steve and Eve and Alicia. And then Brian, thank you, saying Stellwagen. I had to get to someone who said Stellwagen, which is close to me. But just a question that maybe you could answer, Kelly, and then I'm gonna let you go on, is someone asked, what is a sanctuary? So if you could just quickly say that.
Well, I am so glad you asked, because that's what I was going to cover next. National marine sanctuaries are kind of like national parks, but underwater. So they protect important habitats, animals, historic artifacts, but there's still places you can visit and enjoy, kind of like visiting Grand Canyon or Yosemite Park out in California. These are places that we protect but visit. So today we're going to talk about the only one located in the Gulf of Mexico. And as I mentioned already, that is Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary, right there where the yellow star is. Zooming in a little bit, you're going to see we have a map here with an inset. And in the inset, this yellow box here is the area where you're going to find Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. All the little red dots you see inside the yellow box, that's the sanctuary, just so you can see where it is in relation to the coast of Texas and the coast of Louisiana. We put a couple key cities on there to help you with that. But then if you get into the bigger map area, you're going to see the whole sanctuary stretched out along the continental shelf. That's the shallowest part of the ocean just off of the main continental area. And then in the darker blue, it gets into much deeper waters. So the maximum depth out here is about 500 to 700 feet. But the red areas that you see here are all the banks. There are 17 banks that make up the sanctuary, and each bank is a small underwater mountain raised up off the sea floor. The coral reefs we're talking about today are found on top of two of these banks, East Flower Garden Bank and West Flower Garden Bank. And that's where we're going to focus our time today. So this is what our reefs look like out of the Flower Garden Banks. They are massive amounts of coral that stretch as far as you can see into the distance. If you look way into the background of this photo, beyond the fish, you'll see that there's still a lot more coral back there. The main reef building species are brain corals and star corals. You can see star coral here on the left, brain corals down the middle, and some more star corals over on the right. But you're also going to see sponges, the bright orange spots, and the purple and green algae that fill in the nooks and crannies on the reef between the corals. This section of reef is almost all different species of star corals. You can see some of them have a very lumpy shape, some of them have bigger bumps, and they're all kind of intermeshed together. These are the species that dominate the reefs, and they are considered a threatened species. And most coral reefs where they occur, they've been disappearing. But the Flower Garden Banks, this is most of the coral we have. So that's a really fascinating aspect of it, protecting these endangered species. The reef is so crowded with these corals in some places that they fit together like puzzle pieces. So if you look at the edges here, you can just see how they completely connect up one to the other, just like jigsaw puzzles. Any questions so far?
All right, this is Grace from the chat box, and I think I told you that this is a savvy crew that always has lots of questions. So one of the questions that came in, you're going to get to later, but I just wanted to put it out there, is what do sharks and stingrays eat? So when you get to the sharks and stingray portion, please let us know what they eat.
Okay.
One of the other questions that came in came from Patricia. And that was, how do you mark the locations of the banks so that people don't bother them?
That's a very good question, Patricia. It's hard because we don't have an entry road like you would in a national park. So it's relying on maps and electronic geographic information systems. So most people who go out in a boat have some kind of electronic map aboard that lets them see where the sanctuary is located.
Great. And Theodore asks, how many kinds of coral are there in your area?
Theodore, we have about 23 to 25 different species of coral at the Flower Garden Banks, which is less than you're going to find in the rest of the Caribbean, but still we have a very balanced ecosystem.
And Michelle's wondering, do star corals grow everywhere in the ocean?
Star corals can be found in all different coral reefs around the world, not everywhere in the ocean, but in coral reefs around the world. They just happen to be not doing so well at most reefs, unlike the Flower Garden Banks.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hold on to questions and let you continue, but I just want to let you know, Evie asked, what are some of the creatures that live among the coral? Kelly is going to share it and show us, Evie, so just hold on to your hat. And also, Kendra asked what sharks are native to the area, and that's coming too. So they are ready to hear everything you have to share with us, Kelly. So back to you.
Okay. Well, first today, I thought I'd talk about coral because that's what builds our reefs. And so what exactly is coral? We're going to start off with that as a poll question.
Okay, so this is Grace from the chat box. I am going to launch that poll. And so what you need to do is you need to vote. Do you think that coral is a plant? Do you think it's an animal? Or do you think it is a mineral? So go ahead and vote, and I'll share the responses in just a minute when everyone has had a chance. but I am watching the numbers. People are voting, Kelly. It's coming. So you have about 5 more seconds. Do you think it's a plant? You're doing the poll that's on the screen. I see some people are answering me in the chat box. That's what we're used to doing. But we have a poll too. But you all agree, I have to say. Everybody that is writing in the chat box and the poll, I'm going to actually show what people said. Whoops.
Okay.
Oh goodness, I did something wrong. So I'm going to just tell you that the answer that came in was animal. Everybody thinks that animal is what a coral is.
Well, everybody would be right. Corals are animals made up of smaller parts called polyps. What you're looking at in this image are it's a side view of all these polyps. You can see how they're kind of long and tube shaped and have a bunch of tentacles sticking out off the top. They're like miniature sea anemones. They're very soft and have lots of tentacles. These tentacles form a ring around the mouth opening at the top of the tube shape, which you can see here, but there also are symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae that live inside the polyps. If you look at the color here, the greens and the oranges that kind of come through, that color comes from the algae that live inside the corals, not from the corals themselves. If you look at the tentacles that are stretched out, they're actually clear. So coral polyps on their own are clear, but with their symbiotic algae, they have color, usually in the orange, brown, green range. This is not only what gives them their color, but without the algae also help them to feed through the process of photosynthesis. Underneath the coral polyps is the skeleton. So on the right here is a picture of a coral skeleton. It's a small piece. This skeleton is made of calcium carbonate, which is kind of like limestone, that the polyps create. If you look at the diagram on the right, you can see they build it underneath themselves. So this is a cross section of a coral polyp, and it shows they almost have kind of like little feet that poke down into the stony part, and they're building this stony part, excuse me, oh, didn't mean to do that. They're building the stony part underneath them, and if you, just did it again, sorry. If you look at the individual circles here, one little circle here on the skeleton, you'll see that that's where those feet of the polyp sit down. And I also have right here a piece of skeleton that I'm going to hold right up close to the camera so you can see it. And there you go. You can see it's almost like a little cup that the coral polyp sits in. So it's a circle, and then their little feet stick down into the little crevices inside that circle. That's how the coral builds their skeleton. So what the end result is that you have a layer of living coral polyps across the surface of a hard, stony skeleton, and inside those coral polyps are algae. So we actually have aspects of plants, animals, and minerals when you're talking about reef-building corals. You can see in this picture here, the picture at the bottom left is a picture you've already seen. That's a big mountainous star coral. And then this is what it would look like up close at night. Because for most corals, the polyps come out at night when they put their tentacles out to feed. During the daytime, they rely on the photosynthesis and they don't need their tentacles out. You see, it makes them look kind of fuzzy. And then one more look at a brain coral, same thing. The polyps are out, so it looks kind of fuzzy now compared to what it looked like in the picture that you have already seen previously, a section of brain coral. So now that we've covered a little bit more about the corals that build the reefs, any more questions?
We do have a few questions. So Katya asked, do the corals grow from the ground?
They don't actually grow from the ground. When they're born, so to speak, they hatch out of an egg into a little larvae that is a tiny microscopic animal that floats along in the ocean, and then it settles down and it attaches. So if you've ever seen a sea anemone, think about how the bottom is stuck to the rock that it's sitting on. That's what a coral polyp does. It needs a hard place to settle on, and then it sits there and it forms from a larvae up into the polyp with the tentacles sticking upwards. So once it's fastened there, it stays there for the rest of its life.
Great. Engage asks, can you explain why some corals look white? The pictures you just showed had the vibrant colors, and but I have seen pictures of white corals, and I know you touched on this, but if you could just say it again, just so everyone understands where the color comes from.
Okay, the color comes from the algae inside the polyps. So when you've seen pictures of white corals, that means the algae has left the corals, and that's a situation called bleaching. And so you're seeing through the clear polyp down into the white skeleton like this below. So when you're seeing through the clear to the skeleton, you see white. And bleaching is something that happens when corals are stressed.
Great. And if you want to hear more about coral bleaching, if you check out some of our previous coral webinars, there was information there. And Clark wonders, how long does it take a coral to grow?
It takes corals a very long time to grow. The big, huge corals you've seen in my pictures took hundreds and hundreds of years to grow. Most of the species, the star corals and brain corals that we see out at the flower garden banks, only grow about 1/4 of an inch to maybe about 1/8 of an inch, to about 1/4 of an inch a year. So a very tiny amount each year. And so therefore it can take 8 years just to grow an inch when you're talking about some of the really slow growing ones. And so for them to be 15, 20 feet high, as some of them are out in the sanctuary, it takes a very long time to get there.
And Jody wonders, can you touch the animal? Can you touch the coral?
You could touch a coral if it's out, and it will retract just like an anemone. So the tentacles are out, and if you touch it, it retracts on contact, or it tries, if you're small enough, it's going to try and sting you to capture you for food, but we're too big for that. So yes, you could touch corals. It's something we discourage because if corals have too much contact with other things, it can harm them.
Great. And last question before I let you go on comes from Texas. And I think this is a great one for everyone to hear the answer to. Is each coral polyp a single animal, or is the whole coral the animal?
That is a very good question. The whole coral is the animal. The polyps are the part. So every single polyp there is genetically identical. They're all clones of one another and making up one animal. It's kind of like all the hairs on your head. They're all that's just your hair, but you don't count each one separately. You talk about having hair as a collective group. So that's what the polyps are. It's a whole group together. It makes one coral. Very
Great.
good question.
All right, I'm gonna let you move on because I want to see what's next, Kelly.
Okay. All right. So we looked at what makes the reef. Now let's look what lives in the reef habitat created by the corals. And we're going to start that by talking about some of the smallest reef creatures, the invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals without backbones like coral. And what I'd like you to do first is take a look at this piece of a word search and see how many invertebrate names you can find, and then write down in the chat box the very first one you come across.
Okay, this is Grace in the chat box, and I already took this quiz with Kelly. So let's see if you find different things than what I found. So go ahead and write what you see in what's the first invertebrate. And let's see, Texas says jellyfish. Ola says jelly. Laura says brain coral. Hunter says coral. I'm going to see if there are any other. Oh, Theodore sees fish. So I'm just going to tell you, Hannah sees parrotfish. Brenda sees octopus. And Brenda sees brain coral. Let's see if there are any other different ones to come in. I think that's it. Quite a few. Oh, and Eve sees star coral. All
Wonderful.
right.
You guys have done an excellent job. Here's what I found in this section of a word search. The whole word search is actually available on our website at flowergarden.noaa.gov. And this is just one little section out of it. So we will have links available for that after this session, so you can go find the word search and download it for yourself. But in this section here, there's one creature that's not truly an invertebrate by itself, and that's the polyp over here on the left. That's part of an invertebrate, right? It's part of coral. And then there's one animal here that is not an invertebrate at all. Who can find that one?
All right, so this is Grace in the chat box, and I have to say that Shante was already saying that an invertebrate is an animal without a backbone. So everybody is now saying parrotfish has a backbone, so they are not an invertebrate.
That's right, they're not. So right now we're going to focus on the invertebrates, and we'll get to the parrotfish later. Here's one of the first invertebrates I'd like to share with you. It's one of the tiniest ones. It's very small. It's called a red night shrimp. It's red and it comes out at night. Its name says it all. And it's about the size of your thumb or smaller, no matter what size thumb you have. These guys can be really tiny and get up to about the size of maybe an adult thumbnail or so, or adult thumb at their biggest size. Another interesting reef creature is the long-spined sea urchin. This is one of the largest invertebrates out on the reef, and it has a hard shell covered in very long spines that make it as big as a basketball. Yep, you can see the little pictures I put up there for size reference on each of these slides. And do you see what's hiding under that urchin? It's another invertebrate. It's a tiny crab, a little red crab hiding under there. So urchins themselves can be habitat on the reef. Here's another creature that likes to hide around urchins. You can see the spines right behind it. This is called an arrow crab. The arrow crab is very tiny. The size you see says it's the size of the palm of your hand, but that's what this leg's all spread out. It's kind of like a daddy long legs. A little bit of a body and then very skinny, scrawny legs that stick out. So its body itself is probably about the size of one of your fingernails, and then it has each of those long legs spreading out to make it the size of your palm. But you can see it's still pretty small as it fits in underneath an urchin. And here are some ruby brittle stars. These are relatives of sea stars, not starfish, because they're not fish, they're invertebrates, remember. So stars are ruby, these are ruby brittle stars, have a central disc, and in the case of the ones you're seeing here, that's about a quarter to a 50-cent piece size, and then they have these long, sinewy, squiggly arms that help them move around the reef that kind of look snake-like when they move. These are as big as salad plates when you take into the stretch of their arms. So not your full-size dinner plate, but more like a salad plate. Another interesting creature on the reef and one divers love to encounter are the beautiful Christmas tree worms. Yes, I said they're worms, and yes, I said they're beautiful. I mean, this is the proof right here, right? Each pair of Christmas trees belongs to one worm, and these are its gills. This is how it extracts oxygen from the water, and it's how it catches food too. The body, the main body, is inside of a long, hard tube that it builds, and then the coral grows around the tubes. You'll never see the worm itself. You just see its beautiful gills sticking out, and you can see they come in all sorts of colors. And the size of the gills, the tree structures, the Christmas trees, it's about the size of a mini or a snack-sized candy bar that you might get at Halloween time. This is a hermit crab. Hermit crabs are in the crab family, so they have a hard skeleton of their own, but hermit crabs don't have that on the back half. So they pick up another seashell belonging to a snail and tuck their back half inside that and use that as their home for their protection. This guy you see here is one of the bigger ones on our reef. It's about the size of a pear if you include the shell. Our smaller ones might be size of your thumbnail. They get really tiny, but up to the big ones like this too. And of course, the spiny lobster, this is one people like to eat, but it's really important that here in the sanctuary, we don't let people capture these. We let them grow as big as they want to be, and they can be all different sizes of loaves of bread. So even from your small size up to the big long sandwich loaf, you can find lobsters out there in all sizes. It's the tail we like to eat, but by letting the big ones grow and not be collected out here in the sanctuary, we're protecting their populations for future benefit because their larvae are then going to float and settle on other reefs, and we continue to replenish the population. And last but not least, our beautiful octopus. These guys are masters of disguise, constantly changing colors and sizes and shape. And you can see right here, it's showing you its two false eye spots, right here and here, that make it look bigger than it really is. The actual eye, this is one right here on the side, and the other one's kind of hidden. So you can see how it uses camouflage here as well as false eye spots. And it's the size of a cantaloupe melon, kind of the orange insides, but much bigger if it actually spreads out all of its arms. So on that note, with all of our invertebrates introduced, what kind of questions do you all have?
This is Grace from the chat box. We do have a few questions about those animals without a backbone. This question comes from Carol. For the long-spined sea urchin, are those spines sharp like a needle?
They are very sharp, and it's something you need to make sure you don't bump into. Even if you're wearing a wetsuit underwater, that can poke right through that. And it's not that it's not poisonous or anything, it's gonna hurt. Just like if you got stabbed with a needle or a pin, they are very sharp spines. So we do have to watch out for those on the reef.
Gotcha. And Kamaya asks, can you eat an arrow crab?
I would say no. I think arrow crabs are way too small. I know people eat crawfish, and that's getting just a little bit of meat, but these are even smaller than crawfish. So I wouldn't think there's enough meat there to worry about.
And Evie's wondering, do you have nudibranchs on your reef?
We do have nudibranchs. They're, for those who don't know, they're shellless snails, and they come in very bright colors. but the kinds we have are very tiny and they're very hard to find. We don't see them very often, but we've captured a few photos, so we know they're out there.
And since you're doing such a great job of talking about the diversity, Patricia wonders, what's the total acreage of West Flower Garden Banks where you have all these animals? And you might not know that, and it's okay to turn it back on them and tell them they have to research the exact acreage if you want.
Well, I don't know. I know that our sanctuary started out as just East Flower Garden, West Flower Garden, and Stetson Bank, and that was 56 acres total. But if you go on our website and you search around, there is a place under question and answers, I think it is, an FAQ page where you can find that information.
Great. Okay, so let's see. Shantae asks, do the long spine sea urchins have different colors other than white? Do they come in different colors?
Actually, that's a very good question. We mostly see black ones. The picture I showed you is a mostly white one, and sometimes we see them with a combination, and nobody really knows why or what determines whether they're white, black, or a combination of both.
All right, last question comes from Theodore. Have you ever seen an octopus in real life, Kelly?
I have seen an octopus in real life, and actually it's one of my favorite animals. I have my whole house decorated with octopus stuff, and I'm wearing an octopus today.
Excellent. Well, there are quite a few questions about octopus or octopi that came in, but I'm going to turn it back to you to keep going. Okay. So back to you.
Great questions, everybody. Keep it up. All right, how about some more marine life? Now we're going to head into the vertebrate life on the reef, starting with fish. So let's begin with a quick quiz. Which of these are not fish? You can type the letters of the non-fish into the chat box this time.
All right, this is another quiz that I took before you just to practice up. So what Kelly's asking you, this is Grace from the chat box. Which of these are not fish? So let's see. Joseph says that H is not a fish. Laura says that E is not a fish. And Ola says C, E, F, and H. Yeah, we had Texas also says C, E, F, and H. Let's see if anyone says anything else. We've got a lot of people. And somebody said I is not a fish, but I think that's it. I think everybody's casting their votes, and a lot of people are voting for those letters that they're not a fish.
That is fantastic. So C, E, F, and H are definitely not fish, even though two of them have the word fish in their names, starfish and jellyfish. Remember, people called anything living in the ocean a fish back in the day, and we just never gotten past that. So most scientists now call these jellies and sea stars, so we don't confuse them with fish. But everything else there is a fish. We're going to go take a look. So starting with small fish. This little fish here is about the size of a nickel. It's smaller than the arrow crab you see that we've already learned about. You can see they're both hiding underneath the spines of a sea urchin there. Reefs are really important nursery grounds for all kinds of fish. So this guy, even when fully grown, is only a couple inches long, but you'll find tiny versions of big fish out here on the reef too. And then, of course, big fish, the ones that are predators like this barracuda. They come to the reefs for food because they're looking for the smaller things they'd like to eat, but they also come for cleaning stations, and that's what you see here. This barracuda is sitting perfectly still, hovering just above the reef, and this tiny little purple and yellow fish, Spanish hogfish, is a cleaning fish. It's actually picking dead skin and parasites off, and those cleaning stations are also really important for all of the big fish. We also have colorful algae-eating fish, and this is a really important task on the reef because algae grows faster than coral. If something wasn't eating it, we'd have algae reefs instead of coral reefs. Parrotfish are named for their beak-like teeth that you see here. They're used to scrape the algae from the reef, but in the process, they often get lots of pieces of coral skeleton, and that can't be digested, so eventually it's going to exit out the other end of the parrotfish, which means that most sand around coral reefs is actually parrotfish poop. I knew you'd like that. We have camouflage fish. Can anybody even see the fish in this picture? Look very carefully. You can sometimes find the eye the easiest here. It's called a spotted scorpion fish. The spots are hidden in its partially closed fin here, but this is the fish sitting right here on top of the reef, blending in with great colors that match the stuff on the reef, growing on the reef. And we have longfish. No pectoral fins on this, which are the side fins that you're used to seeing on fish, but it does have the really long dorsal fin, the one across the top. This is a type of eel called a moray, and it's called a purple mouth moray because when it opens its mouth, it's actually purple inside. And again, this is a cleaning station. This little shrimp that you see here is doing a good job of cleaning this eel. And they're odd-shaped fish. This guy looks like a pyramid when you look at it face on. It's actually a triangular box-shaped fish with a long snout out in the front. It's called a smooth trunk fish. This is one of my favorites to see on the reef. It looks really funny as it's swimming around with that odd shape. And of course, other things like food fish. These are snapper. Snapper and grouper are two very important food fishes. The fish that grow on the reefs provide places for people who fish for a living to make their livings, and they also provide the food that many of us need to eat on land. So reefs are really important nursery grounds for these. This is where they can grow up in a more protected environment, and then that overflows out into the areas where people can fish. Although you can fish in flower garden banks, but only with hook and line. And that sums up just a little summary of the fish we have out there. So I'm ready to take some more questions.
Okay, this is Grace, excuse me, from the chat box, and we have some questions about fish. Shantae's wondering, does the moray eels bite bring electricity? Is it I think you might have said it was an electric eel. Is there electricity when it bites you?
No, this is not an electric eel. An electric eel is actually a freshwater species. This is just a type of eel. It's called moray eels, are the species you most often find around coral reefs.
Gotcha. So that was just a little confusion on our end.
Yes.
Theodore's wondering, what's your favorite fish?
My favorite fish is one that I haven't actually seen in person yet. It's called a peppermint basslet, and it's a little tiny fish that it's bright yellow with red and blue stripes down its side. I've seen it when I've been dissecting other fish, so I know other fish are eating it. I know it lives out there on the reef, but I've not seen one yet.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to have to look that up and see what it looks like when we get off. Olive is wondering, do some fish get their colors based on what they eat?
Not that we know of. That is a good question because some birds do. I know that. As far as we know, the fish don't get their colors from what they eat, but they can change colors throughout the course of their life. So, like the little fish I showed you at the very front, brilliant purple and yellow. As an adult, it's just kind of a pale yellowish brown. So maybe it's more important. The colors are more important when they're juveniles. But we're still learning a lot about what color means for fish. So they can change colors and patterns throughout their lives, many of them.
Okay, and Patricia's wondering, is fishing allowed on the reefs?
Fishing is allowed in the flower garden banks, but what we do to protect the reef is limit what kind of fishing gear they can use. So people can only fish with hook and line, the way you and I think of, throwing a hook out with some bait on it off of a fishing pole. We don't let people drag nets or put traps or use spear fishing out on the reefs. So we can protect the reef bottom and protect the biggest fish of the population, which produce the most babies to help keep things going.
Great. And I'm wondering, can you repeat the name of your favorite kind of fish? Because I'm going to write it in the chat box for folks because people are asking how to spell it.
It's called a peppermint basslet. So B-A-S-S-L-E-T. So
all right.
Basically, they're calling it a little bass.
Excellent. Well, I will put that in the chat box in case anyone missed it, but thank you for repeating that. And Kamaya wonders, do fish have eyelids?
I don't know. That is a great question. I'm trying to picture a fish in my head and think. I know that sharks do. They have kind of an eyelid called a nictitating membrane that closes over their eye when they're feeding to protect it from any spines or pokey things that might happen from the eating process. I don't know about other fish. I don't think I've ever seen a fish blink. So my thought is no, but I'm not sure. That's something you guys should Google.
Yeah, I think the answer is that they don't. But what I will tell you is that in 2 weeks, we're going to have some reef fish specialists that are going to build on what Kelly is sharing. So if you have some specialized fish questions, you'll be able to ask them in 2 weeks. In fact, one of their study areas is flower garden banks. So there'll be a nice follow-up to what Kelly is sharing with us. So that is, I'm going to hold off on any other fish questions because I know you still have exciting things to share with us. So I'm going to let you continue on, Kelly.
Okay. Coming up on the last section here, the biggest marine life. So what's the stuff that all the divers are hoping to see most when they visit our reefs? they're looking for the corals and looking for the brightly colored tropical fish, but the big thrills are sometimes the biggest things out there. So we have 2 species of sea turtle that regularly visit our reefs out of the 5 that are found in the Gulf of Mexico. This one is the Hawksville Sea Turtle, named for its hawk-like beak, and it loves to eat sponges, so it finds plenty of food here. All the sponges that grow between the corals, there's just a ton of food here in the sanctuary. The next I'd like to show you is the Loggerhead Sea Turtle. This is the other species that's named for its big head, and this species also loves to be in and around the reefs. It finds plenty to eat here. Beyond sea turtles, of course, there are sharks, and I seem to remember there were a couple questions about sharks. Grace, could you remind me what the questions were about those?
Yeah, this is Grace in the chat box. There were a couple questions. One was just, what does a shark eat, and what are the species that you tend to see on your reef? What are the most common ones?
Thanks for the reminder. So this is called the sandbar shark, and this is what I call a sharky shark. It's the one that has that typical shark shape that you tend to think of. These are swimming along the reef all the time. They eat other fish, and I have actually seen some predation out on the reef where they've gone after some other fish every once in a while. They don't bother divers. They're sometimes curious about us, but they'll come in, take a look, and swim away. They don't want to be near us any more than they have to be. We also see spinner sharks. We've seen tiger sharks. What else? Blackfin sharks. So those are the typical ones that we would see, the sharky looking sharks. We also have hammerhead sharks. And the next one I'm going to show you here is a nurse shark. So this is one that's more likely to be seen sitting on the bottom. In this case, they chose the reef itself as the bottom. Other times they're sitting in sand flats. But these are more of the what they call a cat shark shape. They're more shaped like other fish, and they have a couple little things sticking out around their mouths that remind us of catfish. So there are lots of shark species out there, and there's still one more I'm going to mention a little while later. In addition to sharks, we have their close relatives, the stingrays. The one thing all of them have in common is their skeleton is made of cartilage rather than bone. Stingrays are called stingrays because of a sharp spine on top of their tails. I'm pointing it out with my arrow right here. This guy has a shorter tail than usual because it got probably bit off by a predator at some point, but the spine is what it uses for self-defense as it feeds along the bottom. The other kind of ray that we see a lot of are manta rays, and these are different. You'll see they have, they're very widely spread, but there is no spine on the tail. It's just a straight long tail, just like the stingrays, but these guys swim up above the reef, whereas the stingrays swim along the bottom and feed on the bottom. Manta rays actually feed on plankton up in the water column. So this is the typical view we see when it first comes in. You see it from the top like this, where it's all black, but then this is the view we want to see. This is where we try to take pictures as much as possible because it's the identifying marker, and we try to identify individual manta rays as much as possible to help understand how many of them live around the sanctuary. To date, we've identified over 100 manta rays, and we can identify them by this fingerprint of sorts, which is the patterns and markings on their bellies. But the biggest creature of all that visits the reef is the whale shark. So tell me real quick in the chat box, is it a whale or is it a shark?
All right, this is Grace from the chat box, and I told Kelly that I thought you all were going to knock this out of the park and know exactly, and it's true. Laura, Texas, let's see, Jaden and Evie and Katya and Alice and Paul and Ola, everybody is saying it's a shark.
It is a shark. Very good, everyone. It's just a shark that's as big as some whales, and that's how it got its name, the whale shark. But again, this is not one of your big predatory sharks. It's got a big, huge mouth across the front that it opens really wide to suck in water and get plankton. So just like the manta rays, the whale sharks feed on plankton, and these are two of my favorite things to see cruising through because they're just so unusual and so massive and so graceful. I have actually seen, I got to swim with whale sharks someplace else in the more recent past, but I've seen them at the flower garden several times, just not been able to swim with them at the time. So from big to small, coral reefs have them all, from our little tiny shrimp up to our huge whale sharks. Coral reefs are important habitats for so many animals, including the corals themselves, and coral reefs are home to at least 25% of all ocean life at some point in their lives. And that's why we wanted you to introduce you to ours off the coast of Texas here. These are very special reefs They're some of the healthiest reefs in the whole Gulf and Caribbean, and we're very proud to have them here off the coast of Texas. Questions?
Excellent. Well, we do have questions. Everybody loves rays and sharks, but I have to do a shout out to Evie, who said that the telltale sign, looking at whether that was a shark or a whale, is looking at the tail fin. And that is a great thing to look at, whether it
really
is. Yep, that will tell you whether it's a shark or a whale. So great job, Evie. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, a couple of questions. Tatiana's wondering, do you have whales that go through your sanctuary?
Not that we know of. We know they're out in that part of the Gulf of Mexico, but we don't know specifically. They've recently sighted orcas not far from the sanctuary, and there's been recent sighting of a humpback whale out in the Gulf of Mexico. But we, miles away from the sanctuary, nothing. We see dolphins every once in a while, which do qualify as whales in the sanctuary, but not what we typically think of as whales.
Gotcha. And Susan asks, is it true that sharks have to keep moving?
It depends on the kind of shark. So you saw the nurse sharks sit on the bottom. They've got a special function where they can actually pump water over their gills. Whereas other species of shark, like the sharky looking sharks, like the sandbar shark and so forth, do have to keep moving in order to keep the water going over their gills. So it depends on what kind of shark they are and whether they have the mechanism to keep the water pumping over their gills. Good question.
And Katya asks, how many species of shark, I think you name them, but in sort of number, how many species of shark do you have on the reef?
I don't remember exactly. That's a good question that can also be found on our website. We have a whole species list on the website.
And did you already say, people have been asking, Anna asked it most recently, what do stingrays eat?
Oh, stingrays. So they feed along the bottom. They're mostly eating shellfish and crustaceans, which would be crabs and shrimp and things like that. So clams, crabs, shrimp, things like that. They have hard plates in their mouths they use to crush up those foods.
And Shantae's wondering, do the sandbar sharks stay around the sand? Is that why they're called sandbar sharks? I
honestly have no idea why they're called sandbar sharks. When I first met and learned about them, they were called brown sharks. So it depends on who you ask. And I don't think they're particularly brown either. So common names are funny that way. They mean something to the person who named them and got into common usage, but not necessarily to everybody.
And Olive is wondering, a lot of people are concerned about the octopus in your reef. Would a shark eat an octopus?
It certainly could. Yes. So if the octopus is out in the open, it's fair game for anything. I don't know if the sharks I've shown you would eat the octopus. I haven't seen that, but that's why they use camouflage. Whenever they're out in the open, they try to blend in as much as possible or present themselves as bigger than they really are as a method of defense from whatever's looking to eat them.
Excellent. And Alicia asks, why is it true that sharks fall asleep when they flip over? And if it's true, why?
I have seen that many times in Discovery Channel programs too. It is true that it happens, but I honestly don't know why. And we've never done that particular kind of work at the Flower Garden Banks.
It would be an interesting study. All right, let's see. I'm going to see if there are any. Oh, this question always comes in and I always like to ask it. Laura asks, what is your favorite part of your job?
Oh, wow. Favorite part of my job. Well, I have to say scuba diving is a pretty cool part of my job. It's something I never thought I'd be doing as part of a job. So that might have to be it, but I also love doing our website. I'm actually the web coordinator for the Flower Garden Banks, and I love trying to find ways to share all this great information in places that people can find it anytime they want, even if they're not participating in a presentation with me.
Great. Well, to follow on that, people finding out more information about your sanctuary, Texas asks, is there a visitor center or something on land that you can visit for the Flower Garden Banks sanctuary, or can you just visit it in the water?
Unfortunately, we do not have a visitor center right now. So just visiting it out in the water, and it's over 100 miles offshore, so it's a very long boat ride. Most people who visit are either scuba divers or fishermen. However, we have worked with local aquariums to put in exhibits about the Flower Garden Banks. So in Texas, you can visit the Flower Garden Banks at Texas State Aquarium. That's one of the oldest exhibits. There's this very small one at Moody Gardens in Galveston, and the other one is in Corpus Christi. And then if you're not in Texas, you can visit the Tennessee Aquarium. That has the largest flower garden banks exhibit. It's a huge, enormous exhibit that probably looks the most like the sanctuary of any of them all.
I love it. Well, now I have to make a road trip to come see. I would love to do that. I think I'm going to stop because we've kind of reached our time. That was everything you had, Kelly, right? We covered all of yours. And I will share, thank you. So Kelly has put the links for Flower Garden Banks, their site. There's also a link from our NOAA Live website. If you want, you can just go click on the name there and it will take you to their site. Lots of great resources. The word search that you did is one of the resources that's on our NOAA Live page. So you can click and it'll take you to the Flower Garden Bank's word search that you did, as well as some other fun activities. So thank you so much, Kelly, for doing such a wonderful job. Thank you to our American Sign Language interpreters. So glad to have you. And thanks to everyone who asked great questions. We really, the questions are what make it. So thanks so much. And just as a reminder, next week is going to be really cool. We have a NOAA Live on NOAA buoys and all of the information that they gather and how we use that information. Well, I'll give you a hint. This group next week is part of the National Weather Service, if that gives you a big hint. So tune in, same place, same time to learn all about buoys next week. But thank you. I have to say, going into this, I didn't realize that Texas had coral reefs. So I was very excited to learn that. And I'm going to learn more about the animals there because you showed some amazing creatures. So thanks so much to everyone, and we will see you next week.